comes as well when you take into account. You don't have to take into account.
Thanks for Is it recording now? Oh, yeah.
It is recording.
Can you hear me online? Where's the Eno?
The books. Guys. Do a bomb or do a bomb? A guts. Just do a bomb? A guts, yeah.
You can do whatever you want to do at this point. You can hit a bomb, you cannot hit a bomb. Let's just chant the Gatha Mokklinga Sutra.
Page 2.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Roshi.
The last day of our Rohatsu Sesshin. So I'd like to talk about the map, it's not the territory. And not talk about it, but talk. Yeah. Can you not talk about it? So, you know, it's Zen, like anything, can be co-opted and stereotyped, and we can get so familiar with certain terms and certain words that we start using them almost like formulas, even in Cohen's study, right? We say, oh, it's the absolute and the relative, which is referring to something profound, the Dharma, the one and the many. But any words we use are dualistic, right? And aren't expressing the depth and the breadth of what that experience actually is. So we can make, Zen can become a stereotype too. I was once, we do the day in the village in the early years. I remember it might have been the first one. I sat at our table and someone came by and said, "You know Phil Jackson?" I said, "No." I mean, I know. I think isn't he the coach of the Chicago Bulls? He said, "You don't know Phil Jackson? Well, how can you be a Zen Buddhist if you don't know Phil Jackson?" I don't know Phil Jackson. So, yeah, we can make stereotypes about Zen. And in the early years when I was practicing at Zen Center Los Angeles, Roshi was giving a Teisho on Mu, he would just roar. And there was this kind of style in Japanese Zen, and it's really dramatic and moving if you've ever heard a teacher speak like this, but it's a kind of a macho thing. So it's very refreshing to hear Baizon give his talk yesterday in such an ordinary, authentic way of being himself. Totally moving. Really enjoyed it. I particularly like the idea that you didn't have a title, even though I gave you one when I made the video. I forgot that you didn't have a title. I should have said no title. I think I told this story before, that there was this Kalu Rinpoche and Song-san, the Chinese Zen master, met at some rich person's house, and they were supposed to have some kind of, Dharma combat or debate. And so Shung-san he takes this orange out of his gray robe and he sticks it out in front of Kalu Rinpoche. He says, "What is it?" Kalu Rinpoche is fingering his prayer beads. Doesn't say anything. He's just looking at him. So again, Shung-san says, "What is it?" He's holding the orange out, right? Kalu Rinpoche is looking at him. And he turns to his translator and kind of whispers to his translator and says, "What's the matter with that guy? Hasn't he ever seen an orange So, I have been trying to talk about complexity for quite a while now, because life is complex. And, sometimes I find myself, in this session, I've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes, trying to get computers to work and cameras, and I'll tell myself, boy, this is really complicated. But it's not. It's complex. My life is complex, just like yours. They're not complicated. They're very different. And this gets back to this notion of intimacy that I spoke about in the first Teisho when we began this retreat. That complex ecosystems, nature, the world, life, they're complex because the parts communicate. parts feel each other. There is intimacy in the system. And so that communication is a redundancy that creates resilience. And we can say it's an anti-fragile system. But when systems become complicated, they break. They shatter. Because the parts aren't communicating anymore. The parts aren't feeling each other. The parts, when there is no intimacy, then things fall apart. And that leads to conflict. And that leads to violence. And that leads to war. So it may sound abstract when you hear this term, the map is not the territory. But it's not. Korbinski coined this term, I don't know, it must have been in the 40s. And it may sound trivial, but it's not. And the reason it's not is because it's a category error when we mistake the map for the territory. And we do it all the time, and our culture of modernity has taught us to do this almost without thinking. Modernity has brought us many wonderful things: medicine, human rights, democracy, science, but it also brought a kind of blindness to experience, a blind spot, if you will, a voice from nowhere, a kind of metaphysics that was imposed on science that really says subjective experience is not valid. The only thing that's valid is if we do something in a laboratory under controlled conditions. But that laboratory is the map. It's not the territory. It's an abstraction. Because, mice don't live in laboratories. Well, they didn't. One of the first experiments that they did with mice that they used for a long time to talk about addiction is they put a mouse in a cage with two feeders, and one had cocaine and one had water. And they observed the mouse, and the mouse, of course, went and ate the feeder with the cocaine and kept eating it until it fell over and died. And they said, that's addiction. This is what addiction is. No, that's not what addiction is, but that's what they thought it was. That was the model that was used. But mice don't live in cages. They live under floors, and they're sociable, and they hang out together, and they have families, and they play. They don't live in cages by themselves. And so finally someone figured this out years later and said, gee, maybe we should do this experiment again. Let's put a whole bunch of mice in the cage together. Let's give them some wheels to play with and some other toys that they can do, and let's see what happens. And they put a bunch of mice in the cage, and they put one side had the cocaine feeder and one side had the water. And they observed and sure, the mice went, the first thing they did, they went to the cocaine feeder. Of course, they all tried it out. But they stopped. They went back and drank the water. They didn't die. They didn't keep doing the cocaine. So when we mistaken the territory for a map, we are decontextualizing something vital from reality, and we are suffering. That is creating an enormous amount of turmoil and suffering in our culture. And it leads to economies of extraction and conflict and a kind of race to the bottom where the only thing we perceive is a kind of win-win dynamic. And that is destroying us, it's destroying the planet. So the map is not the territory. The name is not the thing named. Orange is not an orange. I suppose what the Zen master was trying to point out. The menu is not the food. You don't eat the menu, you eat the food. The menu is not the food. And if you ate the menu, it would be really, kind of unappetizing meal. The word is not the thing it represents. We need to unpack what this is. The map is not the territory. The diagnosis is not the person. Wow. The language of complexity is not the complexity. My bad. Notice something interesting here. The movement here is not. The map is not. That sound familiar? Does that sound any kind of like a Buddhist thing? Is not? Not? Heart Sutra? The original way the precepts were presented is, we reframed it now, we say, support life is the first precept. Affirm life. But the actual precept originally was not killing. Not stealing. A lot of nuts. Suzuki Roshi said, in the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, and in the experts there are few. So our inability to make this differentiation between the map and the territory leads to confusion and muddled thinking, and we've been well trained to not make this distinction with modernity, and we jump to conclusions and solutions for issues that have been misidentified in hopes of creating a direct correlation to things that are too complex to meet such a direct approach. Stop hunger. Stop war. Stop racism. Stop inequality. Stop global warming. And so on. While all of those require our urgent attention, and I totally get the value of addressing those issues, the failure to perceive them in the nest of their relationships and causal streams results in responses that make the problem worse. And Gregory Bateson called these logical typing errors. It's kind of an unfortunate term because it sounds very, I don't know, mathematical, but it's a error of logical type. And it's hard to, I've been trying to figure this teaching out of Gregory's for most of my life. I took a class from Gregory Bateson the first year that Naropa started. It was in Boulder. It was like 1975, 76. And he died a couple of years later. And he was a terrific human being. Very playful and mischievous, and always asking questions, none of which I knew what he was talking about at all. And I tried to read all of his books for the last 50 years, and I haven't finished one of them. And they're all dog-eared, but I can't get through them. It just goes past me. And so I remember him asking this question. He came into the class, he brought a lobster into the class. He says, what pattern connects the crab to the lobster and the orchid to the primrose and all the four of them to me and me to you? So you see, the menu is not the food. The food is a complex relationship of farmers and conversations and cooks and markets and cultures and language and conversations. That's the meal. That's not the menu. And notice the difference. One is saturated with relationships, all kinds of contexts, right? And one has less saturation. So they're category errors if you don't make that distinction. You're making a category error in terms of epistemology, and that matters. That actually matters. And yeah, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here on the last day of retreat. I'm not going to harp on this, but look, we are living in the world I live in, I don't know, the world I live in is in danger, a serious danger of crisis of all kinds. And I see it in people's relationships, I see it in the institutions, in the schools, in the health system. It's everywhere. The public crisis is personal to me. And I think it's probably personal to you too. It's not abstract. And so you might think that, Zen is supposed to be, you shouldn't talk about things like that. Because that's a Debbie Downer, especially the end of a 7-day retreat. Yeah, why should we be talking about something like so tragic as the existential risk of the end of our species or the end of our planet? And I grew up, post-World War II when the existential risk was nuclear war, but it was kind of a mutually assured not destruction. What do you call that? It was mutually assured not destroying each other, right? There was a kind of balance of power between the two, Russia and the US. So there was never any real danger that either side would use it, but that doesn't exist anymore. There's no deterrent. And so this is the first time, I think, in the history of our civilization that we have some awareness of the existential risk. And there's 3 ways to think about this in terms of a worldview. One is kind of pre-tragic. And is you don't see it. I mean, you don't want to see it. You just see good things. You have rosy glasses, and you have a sentimental view of the world, and maybe you think the world should be like it was in the 50s, and all families should be these ideal families like Beaver Cleaver or something. And there's hardly any family. That's a map. That's not reality. That's not the territory. So you could have that kind of you could be in denial about what is here. And I totally get why you would want to be in denial. Tragedy is really upsetting. It's traumatic. So the second possibility is that you actually acknowledge that tragedy is in our human experience. It's possible to have tragedy and you've experienced it. And it takes you down. It really takes you down. And that's the Debbie Downer. It's despair, cynicism, I have no agency here, nothing I can do, the world sucks, and it's all going, the apocalypse is right around the corner. And then I think there's another worldview, which we might call post-tragic, which is, we do see that there's this existential risk. There is tragedy in the world, and suffering, great suffering. And I don't think we can look away from it if we're being responsible. But it doesn't take us down in the same way. It's like bearing witness to suffering. We can acknowledge the pain and the grief of the tragedy we're living through, but we live through it, we live in it. We don't solve it. Tragedy isn't something we solve or fix. It's something we live with. So there is in modernity a huge blind spot, and it's been created by a kind of metaphysics of science, which says, it's the voice from nowhere. And it really has a bias in favor of the map, the abstraction, the mathematical abstraction, the model. Do you understand what I'm saying? So here's the rub for me personally. I find that whenever I'm talking about something passionately, that I believe in passionately, I end up doing almost the opposite. I do this artistically. I remember the first administration of Trump, I got really pissed off about the second year of when they were, separating parents from babies at the border. I just got really pissed off, and I said, I'm not going to paint with color anymore. I'm just going to paint in black, which I did for a while. But there's something in my unconscious that said, nah. And I declared it to some of my close friends who were artists. I said, I'm not going to paint in color anymore. And then the next week I was painting in color. My conscience rebelled. My unconscious rebelled and said, no, we're not going to have any of that. And I wrote an article on the Matrix. I don't know if you read it. It's on our blog site a couple weeks ago, because I had this experience with my Zen teacher, Nicolene McMahon Roshi, in the late 90s. I had done a 7-day sesshin like this with her in San Diego. And afterwards, you know how you are now. You're all open and dilated and wide open. And we went to the theater and saw The Matrix. It made an impression on me. Yeah? And that movie was really an important movie for me. It's been a kind of it was like something new. It was like, oh, reality could be a simulation, and in fact, much of my life is a kind of simulated reality. And so I found myself protesting that in the blog, you know, being righteous about simulation and machines. And then at the end, I used AI to help me clean up my life. What the heck am I doing here? I just was talking about how machines are simulation, but I'm using AI. So I feel the same way about this talk even today, because, you know, I'm going on and on about the map of the territory and how, you know, science of modernity creates these models of control, where we have the illusion of control, and all the dangers of too much left brain thinking. And I've been spending the last 3 weeks, including this session, completely doing left brain technological stuff. And I found a system for organizing things in a software called Notion a couple of days ago, and I'm developing this whole system for managing our marketing and everything. And it's a map that helps me manage the Zen Center. But it's not completely the map, because I didn't think of it before I had the experience of having to market the center. I thought of it afterwards, so it's a little different to me. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that's the thing, is that experience matters. Our subjective experience matters. Now, there's all kinds of traps in our experience, right? And our practice is about being able to see those traps where we get stuck, and where we grab on to an opinion, a thought, a philosophy, a realization in our practice, and we hang on to it, and then it becomes something else, right? So I think the thing I would finally say here, and I was trying to talk about it when I gave my first Teisho at the beginning of this retreat, is that we are living, I think, we are living at a time between two worlds. Kind of like the Renaissance. Now, in the Renaissance, they were coming out of the Middle Ages, right? Medieval Europe. And the Black Plague killed, at that time, it killed a third to almost a half of Europeans. And people died miserable deaths in the streets. It was terrible. Spread in Asia too. They're coming out of this dark ages. And people like Da Vinci were thinking about telling a new story that would help them move into the new world they were moving into of the Enlightenment, of modernity, of science. And I think we're in very much the same kind of situation here. We're living in a time when much of the practice of modernity, which has been so beneficial for us, has actually become toxic on so many levels. And we don't even see it. It's the air we're breathing. And I mean, one way to understand this is postmodernism has deconstructed value. The postmodern view, which is our world, this is the world we live in, says value is not intrinsic to life. Value is a made-up thing. We've made up values. The good, the beautiful, the true, that stuff's made up. That was something that a philosopher talked about, Plato. Story, that's a made-up thing too. Now, if value is not intrinsic to who we are, and stories are not intrinsic to who we are, then who are we? Where are we? And how are we possibly going to tell a new story that would help usher in another way of being on this planet that is wiser, more loving, more connected, more intimate, more relational? You know, in the early days when computers were just beginning, someone asked the computer if he or she was human. The computer spun for a while, spun a long time, spun. Finally came back with an answer and said, "Let me tell you a story." So, if values are not intrinsic to who we are, if stories are not basic truths about who we are, and who the hell are we? We're a voice from nowhere. And that's going to lead down to conflict, to win-win, to violence, to lack of intimacy, lack of communication. It's going to lead to complicated systems that are fragile, that are going to break apart, that are vulnerable, that lead to trauma. So somehow, we have to find a way to begin to speak to each other in a way that honors our complexity, honors our wholeness, where we belong here in this world, in this universe. And we're not voyeurs. We are all active participants, all active, each one of us. We have agency, and yet, do we? Do we perceive that we do? And the term that Bison said in his talk yesterday that I caught my ear, he said, we're ancestors of those yet to become. Yeah. What does it mean we've lost our memory of the future? We don't have a memory of the future. What would it mean to tell a new story where we take responsibility for the next generation that has yet to be here? What would that ethic look like? And I think it would look a lot like Zen practice. I think it looked like dropping off body and mind. We need a universal grammar of value. And perhaps, there's a reason why modernity was, the instinct of modernity was absolutely on the mark, because all the religions had their own metaphysics, and every religion had their own territory, and people were arguing about whether the wafer was the body of Christ or not. And modernity rightly said, let's get rid of that ridiculous conversation. That's ridiculous. You don't need that kind of metaphysics. Thank God we got rid of that, but they threw the baby out with the bathwater. World religions with thousands of years of wisdom, and all Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam have been deconstructed. And how can we possibly find a way to be intimate together if we don't have values that we share, or shared stories? How's that possible? So the conflict it's a spiritual conflict. It's a conflict of intimacy. Intimacy has been broken. And when intimacy is broken, then life becomes complicated. And we get seduced by the notion of control and isolation. And at the heart of all this is eros. Love is the force of life, all the way down and all the way up. Eros. So maybe the story we tell is going from being Homo sapiens to Homo eros, Homo amor, where we again kind of retrieve the basic allurement that makes us who we are, to each other, to the world, the allurement, the eros, the intimacy. And when the parts lose the allurement, then something fundamental is broken in the world. And I think modernity has done that. And I think we need to, first of all, be able to critique it and understand the disease, the sickness that we are all participating in, and then address it, both personally and collectively. And if we don't do that, then I think we're probably in for a rough ride no matter what we do. But we are facing an existential risk of losing our species, losing ourselves. And I just think that's not acceptable. But I don't think it has to take us down. I don't think it has to be a Debbie Downer. I think it has to be a realistic assessment of the world we find ourselves in today. And what I have found myself in is a world that's increasingly complex, and running the Zen Center is increasingly complex. I almost want to say complicated. It's just right there at the tip of my tongue. I have to stop myself. No, it's complex. It's complex because the things that I am doing are all related to you. And they're all related to the love I have for you and for this practice and the Dharma. And I wouldn't do it otherwise. I'm not doing it for some abstract enjoyment. It's more like a root canal for me. But I have hope. It gives me hope doing this complex work for the Zen Center, because I feel like we have a huge potential to grow and become stronger and deeper. I'm so moved by your practice here in the Sesshin. I'm so moved. Someone that sits still with themselves alone like you do. Someone you can trust. Gee, I didn't talk the whole time. We have time for a little questions, conversation. Yeah, Kathy.
I'll start here. Start here, and we'll go.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much for this talk. I really appreciate the distinction between complexity and, and complication.
Yeah.
I'm going to think about that. And, hearing about the early days of Naropa, then with Roshi Jun's talking about Bernie and being, I mean, it's kind of amazing how many different places you were. It's sort of like, where were you not in the early days of Zen being brought to the United States? It's really incredible. And I guess just getting back to your talk, I'm wondering, talking about the menu not being the meal.
Yeah.
Reminds me, it makes me think a lot about, I guess, embodiment versus disembodiment. And I wondered if you had any embodiment,
yeah.
And how that relates to what you're talking about.
Yeah, I do have some thoughts about that. I was talking to Jun Roshi about this the other day. We talk a lot about embodiment, and there's a good reason why we do, because we talk a lot about being disembodied. But I've thought about this a lot, and it's, how can we be disembodied? How can you have it? We can only have an embodied experience because we're animals. We have bodies. It's not possible to have a disembodied experience. So I think the more interesting way to think about that is what has been embodied. So if modernity has been imprinted in our embodiment, then what we are experiencing is a delusion of huge proportions that we not even know about. And I think that's a more interesting way to think about embodiment. And if we are disembodied, whatever we mean by that, I think we're probably talking more about disassociation. The trauma, severe trauma leads to disassociation, and the disassociation is a disconnection from the body. But it's not really possible to be disembodied. Well, I mean, the severe traumas are catatonic and disembodied, disassociated. And it's a protective mechanism too. So it's not like someone has done something, they're a failure. It's the canary in the coal mine, so to speak. It's a person struggling with trying to come to terms with a world that's upside down, with pernicious, all kinds of double binds and traps, and so that's how I think about it now. Is that it's what has been embodied? Are we embodying the Dharma and loving kindness and gentleness, or are we embodying the American success story of exceptionalism and that drive to win and monetize AI and make $1 million. Are we that's a kind of embodiment too that drives people, but it has a very different intention and outcome. So that's how I would think about it. Good question, thank you. Linda.
Yes, well, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, I admit that.
That's all
But
right.
I tried to read something by Nora Bateson once, and I had no idea what she was talking about. It took me back to a previous life where I had to understand calculus. But it seems like what you're saying is it's just a long, complicated explanation of interdependence,
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
interbeing.
yeah.
The problem, my problem with that is most people see that on a very superficial level.
Yeah.
You know, like we're all humans, we're all into this together, et cetera, et cetera. That, you know, interdependence is very complex. And I'm sure there's been thousands of books written on it, and most of them are unintelligible, like Nora Bateson, I don't know. But, it's like, I'm a simple person, I'm a simple thinker. It's about interdependence and what holds us together. You say, Eros. What holds us together is the Dharma. And people don't realize it, they don't see it, they don't understand it.
Yeah.
That's like saying everybody's got a Buddha within them. Well, first you have to recognize it. They just don't know it's there.
Yeah. So we easily conceptualize something like interdependence too. Now we've been studying that, the whole Anga, right? The Avatamsaka Sutra is all about interdependence, and what a beautiful, abundant vision that sutra is. Joyful, full embodiment of the universe and the world and the fullness of who we are here. So yes, this is all interdependence we're talking about. That's a word, but what is the reality of that here now? What is it possible for me to be when I'm here in this room with all of you? And what's possible for you to be when you're here with me? That's more of the point, the experience, not the abstraction. And I can be something with you that I'm not with somebody else. So context matters. We're always in a context, and I think Zen is always pointing at our direct experience, which we have this experience. It's kind of hard to talk about it, and maybe we say it's being embodied or being grounded, but I think it's also being in the context that we're in and having a meta-awareness of that. And then it gets subtle. Now there's sameness and difference, where we don't fuse in relationships. We're not two, and we're not one. That's the Dharma. And at this point, we're beyond words. And you just got to, write a poem, because there's no other way to really talk about it. So the Dharma is inexpressible. It's incomprehensible.
Yeah. Quote from, what was his name?
That too.
Joseph Campbell.
Yeah.
The problem with religion
Yeah.
is it conceptualizes everything.
Yeah. And then creates territory around its dogma. I've told you this story many times. When we first came here, we were in the house on Humphrey, and someone came from the Wednesday Journal to interview me. And we did this nice interview, and then we were having a Sunday morning program a couple of days later, and so he wrote up this nice interview with me, and he said, Sensei Althouse is giving a dogma talk on Sunday. Yeah.
Next one,
Yeah. Hey, Rob.
As we keep talking, my questions and thoughts keep changing, so I have to catch up. I'll just share kind of some of the thoughts that are coming up for me. And I think you spoke to this, but I think it's really important that we need to create a new story that's based on possibility.
Yeah.
I just find myself, I can go down into the sewer of darkness and the world's collapsing, and it doesn't take me anywhere that's very good at all, other than desperation, I guess, is the word that comes up for me. And I think with interdependence, I just may be repeating what you said, but in our culture, it's held as a belief, like we're all brothers and sisters, we're all connected. But the way we organize ourselves is on this idea that we're all separate, autonomous individuals with our own goals and aspirations that may fall into communities that might be interdependent, but not in an overall cultural way that I think you're talking about. So how can we build connection and interdependence that's real and alive, that promotes connection through what we've been talking about here, the opportunity to share hopes, fears, and vulnerabilities in a safe environment.
I'm not as Debbie Downer as you are, and for the reasons that Linda and Robert pointed out, because I believe in our inherent ability to change our stories. Okay, the problem is that our stories have, as Joseph Campbell said, when the metaphors in our mythology become concretized, as happens when organizations get over-organized. That's when metaphor turns to dogma. And we can address that through our stories. The agency that Frankl brought up, keeping the Auschwitz theme going, that sometimes the only free will we have is how we perceive what's happening to us. Is our story that of victim, or is our story still that of the hero, like Campbell says? So I think that as these organizations, and again, you mentioned the wafer and the church, the teachings of Christ haven't changed, but the teachings of the church have absolutely changed. And we can bring that life into it, just like in postmodern American capitalism, okay? It is a false mythology, okay? And if we can be the people, and we, by definition, our Sangha, the Zen tradition, those who lead philosophical lives are, in fact, always and always will be in the minority. So we have to keep the faith, we have to change the stories, and we have to rebel against those organizations that concretize our metaphors. And I'm not completely confident, but a little more confident, I think, than you are right now.
So a couple things. One, when it comes to religion, I think a better term for God now would be the infinite intimate.
Norman Fisher would like that.
The other term I heard you say, which I'll take issue with, is hero. I think that's a dangerous idea. I don't think there are heroes in nature. I don't think that it's part of our culture. We think about heroes, but really, I don't think there aren't heroes in ecosystems. There are adaptive organisms working together to survive and collaborate, and I think if there's a metaphor or an archetype that's going to be more useful, it would be something along the lines of a bodhisattva, or being able to be connected and to collaborate together to bring forth something together. Not I know what you mean. I know what Joseph Campbell meant too. It was more of an archetype, but we've turned that archetype again into all kinds of roles of masculine toxicity, and this idea again that the individual is alone and supreme and doing extraordinary feats, and I think that is not a very helpful metaphor for the time we're living in. I think a much better metaphor would be something along the lines of a community or a family, a system of people working together in harmony and wisdom. Yeah.
No, and I would just say I was using Campbell's
No, I know.
definition. We are the hero of our own stories in that context. That's all.
Yeah. I just think words matter, and there's some words that now I think we need to be careful with, because they can be. We have broken community. We have violated communication in our culture. We have corrupted communication, which is something really bad. That's communication is sacred. I'll tell you a story about Gregory that Nora told me. When during the war, the British couldn't figure out what to do with him. He was such an odd duck, and so they couldn't do anything with him. So he came to America, and the CIA or the military, somebody put him to work in Asia decoding enemy communications from the Japanese so that he would manipulate that message. So if the Japanese were writing to them, a commander on an island saying the Americans are 10 days away from invading, he would get that and manipulate that so it would say the Americans are 20 days away.
Mm-hmm.
So by manipulating propaganda, by manipulating that message, it created distrust among the Japanese military because the message wasn't accurate. Mm-hmm. And they were communicating something, but it wasn't actually true. And he did that for the whole war.
Alternative facts.
Mm.
He came back from the war really depressed because the Bateson lineage is one of great integrity. His grandfather, his father, William Bateson, had huge integrity. We could tell stories about him too, and I think we should, because he's kind of they've had an impact on the culture that's not really appreciated. But Gregory tried to commit suicide after the war. He was so depressed, he felt like he had done something in such violation to his own integrity about communication. The communication is something sacred, and he had broken that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to add briefly, when we were talking about the map and the territory, it made me think of, there's a name for this thought experiment, but there's a world where everything is in black and white, there's no color, but there are writings about color and how it works and how the cones work in the eye and all of the scientific observations about color. And in this world, there's an expert on color who knows everything about the mechanics and what it is and how one perceives it, and has never seen a color.
I That's exactly, yes, exactly.
And, yes, and so the thought experiment, is there something that this person does not know about color? And I think to me, it's obvious that there is, right? And that's the difference between, the lived experience and sort of understanding something on an intellectual level and
That's right.
and whatnot. And there's a name for this thought experiment that eludes me, but I'll post it if I think about it.
Well, you're getting exactly at what I'm saying, is a scientist that discounts the subjective experience will say color is not real. It's just a wavelength, it's a wavelength.
Right. And scientifically, like that brown color, your experience of that may be totally different from mine because we have different, cone, subtleties, but we call it the same thing. The name, it might not be the same as what our experience is of it. So
It's possible.
yeah.
Yeah, anything's possible.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Roshi. Something that is on my heart right now is just the communication, the language, the words of mental illness. And I think calling mental illness just that puts a lot of emphasis in the wrong way about the mind.
Mm-hmm.
And how important it is to get the mind straight and the focus on the mind as being something that's that important and, just stuck to illness and the stigma. And really in talking to, listening to your talk, what comes to me is this idea of embodied illness as opposed to mental illness. Because trauma response is not in the mind. Trauma response is the body. It's the body having a reaction to a memory. Because trauma happens when your amygdala gets hijacked.
Yes.
It doesn't happen because your mind gets hijacked. And what happens is after your body gets hijacked, your mind builds a story around that hijack.
Yeah.
And that is what people work on, is this mental illness. And they don't work on the disembodiment that happens, where a woman gets raped and becomes disembodied from her own reproductive system.
Mm-hmm.
Or, someone is beaten and they become disembodied from parts of their own body. Or they have the reactions like PTSD. Everything's dealt with like you have a mental problem. And I just, in listening to you talk, I think if we had the ability to change language and care more about the body, then when people act the way they do because of trauma, they'd be received as having a trauma response as opposed to mental illness, because mental illness makes people back away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they leave it with something is wrong with you, but no desire to help make that better. So I appreciate your talk.
Yeah.
We have time. Is it too late? It's
No,
getting
not too late, unless people are hungry, want to go to lunch.
late. We are, but.
Both.
Yeah, thank you. I've been thinking as you were talking about the value of deconstruction, the value of realizing what doesn't work, and there's a lot that doesn't work. And the term that I'm familiar with, and it may come from religion type stuff, but there's deconstruction and then there's reconstruction. And that time in between is perhaps the time that we're in, if we can recognize it, and then be agents for the reconstruction, which will create, people will resist, people will join in. The hope is that we have that change over time, and some of that change is, Shuso, what you were talking about, and instituting a business model that's so whole and follows what we've been talking about, that interdependence. And I don't know what we're going to call the new age. It will happen. I have that confidence.
Let's
Maybe
not
it's
call it New Age.
Oh, I'm sorry. the now, no, but into the future, that sense of it might be one driven by eros, driven by interdependence. Who knows what name some future generations would give to it. And I'm seeing that hope with some of the people who are deconstructing religion, where I'm a part of that as well, and reconstructing, with the basis being, what's that view of God, and where do we get rid of all this useless, well, damaging dogma, and the primacy is love.
Yeah. Totally agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Homo amor. That's who we are. Homo amor.
Yeah. I know in one of the religion things, instead of saying God is omnipotent, whatever else, it's God is omnipotent, all-powerful love.
Uh-huh.
That's some of the wacky people I'm reading. That'd be nice.
I think it's time for lunch. Right? I think everyone's hungry.
Thank you.
Oh, wait, there's someone online.
Oh, we got
I'm
some.
online.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah? Anybody online?
Mhm.
No. Oh. Okay.
Yes.
Okay then. Thank you.
Prepare for lunch.